Cowboys and Elves 4 by T. Martino. Terry lay under the trees on the bedroll and was bored. Whenever she attempted to get up, stiff and dizzy and swaying, Finn or Tor would persuade her to stay quiet. She was impatient to find her way home, and also felt bad not contributing any food as her own supplies were now gone. Finn was anxious about her injury, as the Eldar had not seen many wounded Atani, especially from an orc blade. So Finn rebandaged Terry's arm twice a day, and during that time and around meals, he tried to teach her Sindarin. Finn also tried to pick up words in her language. Terry was reluctant. This was a bit perplexing to the patient Finn. Still, he would name things, then try to get Terry to repeat them, and he would ask her the names in her language. Terry was reluctant to try and pronounce a foreign language. She would roll her eyes sometimes at Finn's approach, knowing that he was either going to ask her to repeat words in Sindarin or change her bandage. This was gently amusing to Finn. Sometimes he would remove the bandage and sing softly to Terry. Terry, try as she might, always fell asleep when he did this. But the pain in her arm grew less, and the wound was healing. Terry one afternoon took the bandage off to inspect her arm. She was rather sorry she did, and after rewrapping it, she could not hide the fact from Finn, who smiled at her one-handed bandage job. But after that, Terry could never find the end of the bandage to remove it. This was frustrating. When she asked Tor about it, by pointing at the bandage and looking at him questioningly, he would shrug and smile and shake his head. Tor had a different approach to Terry. He recognized some of Terry's swearing for what it was. He attempted to learn these words, and quietly, he taught Terry some curses in Quenya. Tor laughed at Terry quickly learning these phrases, and Tor's pantomime of their meanings amused them both, although the curses in Quenya were very mild compared to the swearing of a mountain cowboy. But some meanings were hidden, as Terry was careful what she swore. Terry one morning looked at her pistol holstered laying by her and wondered what she had shot with it. The fact that Finn and Tor could not be dismissed as foreign movie actors was hard for her to accept. But the world she was in now was different. She did not know what to make of this. Her riata lay near her, and with her right hand she felt for it, putting the coils into her lap. Damn it. I forgot that orc snapped the damn thing. Best one I had. Jorge made it. Finn crouched down by her and looked sadly at her riata. Tor standing back a bit. Damn it. He pointed at the rope. Another afternoon, Finn decided to try and cheer her up. He sat down close to her bedroll, where she was recovering. Finn gave her a mysterious smile, clasped both his hands together, then made a hole by his thumb and peered in. Terry watched him somewhat warily. He softly smiled at her and opened his hands. In his hands was a ball of yellow-red flames. He looked at it with delight. Terry reached over to touch it, but before she could, he blew on the ball of fire and it changed colors to turquoise and emerald green. "How are you doing this?" she asked him. He guessed her question and shrugged. Terry took Finn's hand and turned it over. The flame stuck to it. Then she carefully looked at his other hand and felt his sleeves over his wrists. She looked at him skeptically. She glanced over at Tor, seated nearby, chin in his palm. How is he doing this? Tor shrugged as well and gave her a wry smile. Finn then poured the flame into her hand. Terry took it rather reluctantly, but it was cool and feathery to feel. She touched the top, and it responded by following the shape of her finger and retaining that shape, though the rest flickered and burned with cool heat. Finn rested his head on his hand and watched her. Terry fooled with the flames till she understood she could mold it into a shape. She glanced at Finn. Finn smiled slightly. Terry fashioned the ball of flame into a little horse. She looked up at Finn, and his face was so still. When she glanced down at the horse in her hand, the little flaming sculpture turned its head and looked at her. She was surprised and looked back at Finn, who merely raised his eyebrows. Terry looked back at the sculpture, and the flaming horse tossed its head. "Are you doing this?" Finn gave a tiny shrug. And that whole afternoon, Terry sat there and watched the little horse she had made, and for a while she was not bored. Terry had healed and now was preparing to go and find her lost trail on her way home. Finn and Tor had decided to stay with her until either she found her way back or she gave up and they convinced her to go back with them to the city of the caverns. Finn watched Terry get ready, and the sight of the old woman pulling on her boots and saddling Roni brought a smile to his heart. How young she was, despite the heaviness of the years that lay on her. She took joy in seeing things new and interesting. She was so aware of her surroundings, her spirit young in her weakening frame. It was so strange to Finn that her spirit burned up this frail flesh in such a short space of time, and yet Terry appeared to have no horror or fear of this fact. Yet as she lived, the strength in her form was slipping away. She struggled to lift the big 45-pound roping saddle on Roni, but Finn, getting up to help her, was told firmly, "Go away," in her strange language, and shooed with a jerk of her head. He laughed. Finn knew that down the long ages the memory of Terry Mika shoeing him would remain crystal clear. He and Tor could feel her thoughts, knew she was married and very concerned about her family at home. He felt helpless in the face of her strange circumstances. He wondered about the problem of communication and had been gently experimenting in reaching her through thought, but he did this carefully. As Terry got ready to ride out, she observed Finn and Tor closely. They seemed very young, their faces unlined with the weathering of years. They were straight and tall and strong. There was a strange sadness about Finn that clung to him. In Tor, it was more of a defiant humor of some ill justice he had observed in the world. But there was one other feeling Terry felt from them. It was the presence of some beautiful, silent strength hidden, or the wisdom heard when you are a child and sit at the feet of an elder telling you stories. Terry had found a tree in her youth that was centuries old, and she used to sit at the tree's roots, listening to the spring that created music in the rocks nearby, and wonder at what this ancient tree had witnessed. Finn, in particular, felt like that. Terry did not understand this. And she saw Finn staring at her, and she caught his gaze and held it, and there in her mind was an image of two trees shining with a pearl-shot golden glow of light. Then an image of Finn sitting there just as he was, but in her mind he raised his hand in greeting. Terry frowned slightly, then looked around herself. The image was gone, and there sat Finn with a slow smile on his face. She could not ask him questions because she wasn't sure what the questions were, or even if she wanted to know the answers. And language made all of this hard. But at that moment she knew she was far from home, and Finn and Tor were mysterious. Finn watched Terry finish getting her belongings packed up on Roni, and he thought of Terry's actions in the mornings. Just as the sun peeked up over the mountains, Terry would pause and turn towards the sun and whisper something. He had also observed her pulling out a few of her hairs and letting them fall from her hand into the river before she began fishing. Terry started fishing to contribute towards their food supply as soon as she was able. Once he saw her turn and say a whispered remark to an old ancient tree, and then again offer a few hairs, and twice to the sight of an eagle. He longed to ask her why she did these things. What were her beliefs? Did she know of the Vala and Iru? Did she understand the marring of the world and the nature of the Eldar? Terry seemed very comfortable and belonged to the land. Finn asked Tor about this. Tor said, "I do not know how we can discuss this with her. It is complicated for a few simple words or gestures. Though Verrier is very adept at using hand sign in an eloquent way, perhaps it will come up and become apparent." Terry mounted up, and Finn and Tor followed her, smiling when she turned and shooed them.